6 months had passed since Karen Pemberton's spectacular downfall, and life in Willowbrook Heights had finally achieved a peaceful equilibrium. The state investigation had concluded with the HOA being restructured under proper governance guidelines. Karen had quietly resigned from the board, and I had assumed no one would hear from her again. Harold had taken over as interim president, and meetings now lasted 20 minutes instead of 3 hours. I was wrong about Karen staying quiet. It started on a pleasant spring morning when I noticed unusual activity at the house directly across the street from mine. The "For Sale" sign that had been there for months was suddenly gone, replaced by moving trucks and furniture deliveries. I watched casually from my home office window as workers carried in box after box of belongings. Then I saw her, Karen Pemberton, directing the movers with the same clipboard-wielding intensity she had once used to terrorize the neighborhood. She was moving into the house directly facing mine. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Within hours, I received a text from Harold. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen is demanding to speak. She says it's about community safety concerns." The meeting was packed for the first time since I had lived there. Apparently, word had spread that Karen was making some kind of announcement, and people were curious, nervous, or both. If you thought part 1 was wild, you haven't seen anything yet. Make sure you're subscribed to KarenEatWorld with notifications on, because this sequel gets absolutely insane. Hit that like button if you're ready for round 2. Karen arrived wearing a navy blazer and carrying not one, but 2 binders. Her expression was serene, almost zen-like, which immediately put me on edge. The old Karen had been aggressively cheerful in her tyranny. This new calm demeanor was somehow more unsettling. "Thank you all for allowing me to speak," she began, her voice measured and professional. "I know that my previous tenure as HOA president ended under unfortunate circumstances. I've spent the last 6 months in intensive therapy and personal development courses, learning about healthy boundaries and community collaboration." Several residents shifted uncomfortably. Marge whispered something to Harold. "I'm here tonight not to revisit the past, but to address a serious safety concern that affects us all." She opened her first binder to a page marked with fluorescent tabs. As many of you know, the property at 17 Oak Ridge Drive was granted Heritage Commercial designation 6 months ago. What you may not know is that this designation comes with specific requirements regarding public access, parking accommodations, and business operation hours. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where this was headed. According to Municipal Code Section 32.8, any property with Heritage Commercial designation that operates a consulting business must provide adequate parking for clients. Currently, there are no designated commercial parking spaces at this address, which means clients are parking on residential streets, creating safety hazards and congestion. She wasn't wrong. I had been meeting with occasional clients at my home office, and they parked on the public street in front of my house, just like any visitor would. Furthermore, Karen continued, pulling out photographs, Heritage Commercial properties are required to maintain certain accessibility standards, including proper signage indicating business hours, handicap access ramps, and emergency egress routes. None of these requirements are currently being met. Harold looked confused. "But isn't that something the city would handle?" Karen smiled sweetly. "It absolutely is. Which is why I've already filed a formal complaint with the City Planning Department on behalf of our community's safety concerns. I have copies here for anyone interested." She distributed packets to everyone in the room. Inside were detailed reports, photographs, and citations from Municipal Code that I recognized immediately. She had done her homework. "My concern," she said, returning to the front of the room, "is that we have a commercial operation functioning in a residential neighborhood without proper safety compliance. As residents, We have every right to ensure businesses operating on our streets meet the same standards required anywhere else in this city." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Some residents were concerned about safety. Others were worried about property values. A few looked at me with suspicion, as if I had been running some kind of illicit operation. I remained silent, watching Karen work the room with the skill of a seasoned politician. She had learned from her defeat. Instead of wielding petty HOA rules, she was now using legitimate municipal codes. Instead of being the aggressor, she was positioning herself as a concerned citizen advocating for community safety. It was brilliant, and I grudgingly respected the strategic evolution. The city inspector arrived 3 days later. His name was Dennis, and he carried a tablet and measuring devices. Karen stood on her front porch, watching with binoculars as Dennis conducted his inspection. "Mr. Patterson," Dennis said, consulting his tablet, "you were granted Heritage Commercial designation based on the architectural significance of your property and your stated intention to operate a consulting business. However, that designation comes with compliance requirements." He showed me a list. I needed to install an ADA-compliant ramp. I needed designated parking with proper signage. I needed to post business hours and contact information visible from the street. I needed fire safety compliance certification. The list went on. "How long do I have to comply?" 30 days. "If you can't meet these requirements, the city may revoke your commercial designation," which would mean my property would revert to standard residential zoning, subject once again to HOA regulations. Karen's regulations, since I had no doubt she was planning to reclaim her board position. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing municipal codes until my eyes burned. Karen had found a legitimate vulnerability in my strategy. The Heritage Commercial designation that had been my weapon against her HOA tyranny now required compliance standards that were expensive and complicated to implement. Installing an ADA ramp alone would cost thousands and require permits. Designated parking would mean paving part of my front yard. The fire safety requirements would necessitate structural modifications. But as I read deeper into the codes, something caught my attention. A footnote in Section 32.11 about commercial designation exemptions for certain types of professional services. I made a phone call to an old colleague who specialized in property law. "You're looking at the telecommuting professional exemption," she explained. "If your business operates primarily through remote consultation and doesn't require regular in-person client visits, you can apply for modified compliance standards." "How modified?" "Basically, you'd be classified as a home-based business rather than a commercial operation. You'd keep your heritage designation for the property's architectural significance, but you wouldn't need all the accessibility infrastructure." "What's the catch?" "You have to prove that in-person client meetings are minimal and incidental to your primary business operations. And you can't advertise your physical address as a business location." I could work with that. The next morning, I removed the small business sign from my front yard. Then I contacted every client and colleague, informing them that all future meetings would be conducted remotely or at their offices. My home address was no longer listed on any business materials. When Dennis returned 2 weeks later for his follow-up inspection, I presented him with my application for telecommuting professional exemption, supported by documentation showing that 98% of my business was conducted remotely. "This changes things," he admitted. "If approved, you'd meet a different set of requirements. Much less intensive." Karen's binoculars were trained on us the entire time. The exemption was approved within a week. My heritage designation remained intact, but I was now classified as a home-based professional service rather than a public-facing commercial operation. No ramp needed. No parking requirements. No business hours posting. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Karen's next move was even more creative. She filed a noise complaint. According to her detailed log, my commercial activities were generating excessive noise during early morning and late evening hours, disturbing the peaceful enjoyment of her property. She had recordings of phone conversations, the sound of my printer, and even the beeping of my office coffee maker. The complaint went to the city's Quality of Life Department, which took these matters seriously. Mrs. Pemberton has documented 47 separate instances of noise disturbances originating from your property, the Quality of Life officer explained during his visit. While the decibel levels are technically within legal limits, the frequency and timing of the disturbances are concerning. My coffee maker beeps once when it's ready. That's a noise disturbance? She's claiming it's part of a pattern of commercial activity that's incompatible with residential neighborhood standards. Karen was playing a different game now. She couldn't attack my business designation directly, so she was building a cumulative case of incompatibility. Each complaint individually was absurd, but together they created a narrative of a commercial operation disrupting residential tranquility. Over the next month, Karen filed complaints about my outdoor lighting, claiming it created glare that interfered with her sleep. She complained about delivery trucks dropping off office supplies. She even complained about the professional appearance of my landscaping, suggesting it created unfair visual competition with residential properties. None of the complaints resulted in violations, but they created an exhausting pattern of inspections, explanations, and documentation. I realized Karen was trying to wear me down, hoping I would either give up my commercial designation or move away entirely. She had transformed from a petty tyrant into a strategic adversary, and she was demonstrating remarkable patience. But patience was something I had in abundance, and unlike Karen, I had no intention of fighting fair when she escalated things beyond reason. I began my own documentation project. Every time Karen left her house, I noted it. Every visitor she received, every delivery, every activity visible from public spaces. I wasn't violating any privacy laws. Everything I documented was visible from the street or public records. What I discovered was fascinating. Karen was running her own business from home. She had registered an LLC 6 months earlier called Community Compliance Consulting Services. She was offering her services to other HOA communities, teaching them how to enforce rules and maintain property standards. The irony was delicious, but more importantly, it gave me leverage. Unlike my legitimate heritage commercial designation and approved home-based business status, Karen had never applied for any business permits. She was operating a commercial enterprise from a purely residential property without any of the legal authorization she had tried to force me to obtain. I compiled my evidence carefully. Invoices I found in public business registries. Her company website listing her home address. Testimonials from other HOAs mentioning on-site consultations at her Willowbrook Heights residence. Then I did something Karen never expected. I filed a complaint on her behalf. I submitted an anonymous tip to the city planning department about an unpermitted commercial operation at her address, including all my documentation. But I framed it as a concerned inquiry about whether proper permits were in place, expressing worry about liability for the neighborhood if she wasn't properly licensed. The city took it seriously because Karen's own complaints against me had already flagged our street as an area of concern. When the inspector showed up at Karen's house, she was completely blindsided. According to Harold, who heard about it from Marge, who had witnessed it from across the street, Karen had tried to claim she wasn't running a business, just offering friendly advice to other communities. The inspector had pulled up her LLC registration, her website, and her business bank account information. Karen was given 30 days to either obtain proper commercial permits with all the accompanying requirements or cease business operations and dissolve her LLC. The commercial permits would require everything she had tried to force on me. The ADA ramp, the parking, the signage, the fire safety compliance. All of it would cost tens of thousands of dollars and require tearing up her pristine front yard. But here's where I had planned something Karen never saw coming. I owned a consulting firm that specialized in municipal compliance. I was licensed, authorized, and perfectly positioned to help residents navigate complex permitting processes. 3 days after Karen received her compliance notice, she found a business card in her mailbox. My business card. Community compliance issues? I can help. First consultation free. Municipal compliance consulting. I watched from my window as she stood at her mailbox, staring at the card, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read from that distance. She never called. Instead, Karen tried to handle the permits herself. I monitored her applications through my contacts at City Hall. She made mistakes in her paperwork. She missed filing deadlines. She submitted plans that didn't meet code requirements. Each mistake added delays and additional fees. Meanwhile, I reached out to several HOA communities that Karen had listed as clients on her website. I didn't badmouth her directly. I simply offered my services as an alternative, emphasizing my license status, my legal expertise, and my proven track record in municipal compliance. 5 of her 6 clients switched to my firm within 3 weeks. Karen's business was dying before it could even get proper permits to exist. The 30-day deadline came and went. Karen had failed to obtain the necessary permits. The city issued a cease and desist order for her business operations, along with a fine for operating without authorization. She had 2 choices: pay the fine, abandon her business, and avoid further penalties, or continue fighting a battle that would cost her exponentially more than she could ever recover. 2 weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared in Karen's yard. I was sitting on my front porch when she came outside to supervise its installation. Our eyes met across the street, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Karen walked across the street to my property. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, maintaining the property line boundary with deliberate precision. "You know," she said quietly, "when I first met you, I thought you were just another resident who needed to learn how communities work. And now I understand that you didn't just beat me at my own game. You were playing a completely different game the entire time." There was no anger in her voice, just exhausted resignation. The permits, the complaints, moving across the street, it was a good strategy, I admitted. You learned from your mistakes and adapted. That's more than most people would do. Karen almost smiled. But you were always 3 steps ahead. 4, actually. I bought your house. Her expression froze. What? I submitted an all-cash offer yesterday through an LLC. Well above asking price. My lawyer contacted your realtor this morning. The sale closes in 2 weeks. I watched the realization dawn on her face. She had moved across the street to be close enough to monitor me, to make my life difficult, to maintain pressure. And now I was buying her house, which meant not only was she being forced out, but I would profit from any future sale or rental income. Why? She finally asked. Because you taught me something important, Karen. You taught me that in any conflict, the person who controls the property controls everything. You wielded HOA rules like weapons. I just decided to buy the weapons instead. Karen stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back to her house without another word. As I watched her disappear inside, I pulled out my phone and made one final call to my property manager. The house across the street, I want you to list it for rent as soon as the sale closes. Monthly rental, fully furnished. Target demographic, young families with children. Lots of children. The louder, the better. Karen Pemberton had declared war over moving trucks and welcome mats. She had learned to fight strategically, to use legitimate systems, to be patient and methodical. But she had never understood the fundamental truth that I had learned in 20 years of municipal law. In the end, the person with the resources, the knowledge, and the willingness to see things through to their absolute conclusion would always win. When Karen moved out 3 weeks later, I stood at my window and watched her take one last look at the neighborhood she had tried to control. Her eyes found mine, and in that final moment of eye contact, I saw complete and total understanding. She had escalated, adapted, and strategized. And she had still lost, not because she hadn't tried hard enough, but because she had chosen an opponent who would always be willing to go one step further. The defeat in her expression was absolute. If this epic conclusion to the Karen saga left you absolutely satisfied, you need to hit that like button and stay subscribed to KarenEatWorld. Drop a comment and tell me, did you see that ending coming? And should there be a part 3? Let me know what you think. And don't forget to share this with anyone who's ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor. Thanks for watching, and remember, karma always finds a way.